So that is always a risk we run. And I'm going to launch into my introduction here, okay? And we'll get started. So we've got two speakers here today, so we want to allow for as much time as possible. So I want to welcome, let me enable this transcription here. Okay, I want to welcome you all today to our third and last presentation in our Urban Agriculture Pest Management webinar series. This webinar series is coordinated by the Great Lakes Urban Agriculture IPM Working Group. This work is supported by the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture, Crop Protection and Pest Management Program through the North Central IPM Center, and we thank them for their support. A couple of just quick housekeeping things. This presentation is being recorded today. And next week, probably Monday, I'll be able to send out a summary email with the links to view the recordings to all three of our presentations. So just know if you have registered for the webinar, you will receive that summary email with the links to all three presentations. Okay, so let's talk about today. Just to provide you a quick Zoom orientation, you may have noticed that you are unable to unmute yourself. We just want to provide the best kind of viewing experience for everyone and minimize that background noise. So if you do have a question or need anything, please use that chat box. The other thing I want to make you aware of is to get the best possible view, you can go up to your right-hand corner and click the view button, and you can choose speaker view, and that'll give you kind of the best view, and it'll get rid of all those black squares with names, if that's what you're seeing, okay? So again, utilize that chat box if you have questions. I will be monitoring the chat box throughout, so if you have a clarification that's urgent, I'll break through and let that clarification be known to the speaker. And also if the speaker has an interactive question, feel free, I'll be reading off your answers as you put them in the chat box. Okay, but we will do questions at the end of each speaker. So today, to get to today's topic is scouting for and trapping insects in the garden. So today we welcome Sam Anderson from Cornell Cooperative Extension. Sam is an urban agriculture specialist that works in New York City. And also we have Betsy Lamb with Cornell University as well. And she is the New York State Integrated Pest Management Specialist. So we're happy to have them both. And I'm going to turn it over to Sam and he will get us started here.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. So thanks, Maggie. And thanks, everyone, for being here. My name's Sam Anderson. Like Maggie said, I'm an urban ag specialist with Cornell Cooperative Extension in New York City. Been doing this for 5 years, 6 years, I can't remember. One of those two. And most of this time, or most of my work has been with urban farms that are at the scale where they're selling or otherwise sort of distributing what they grow, but also quite a bit of work with community gardens. And of course, there's all sorts of space between the two. So I'm going to talk about scouting for insect pests on urban farms. With bearing in mind that a lot of folks on the call are more at the garden side of things, but I think there's a lot of overlap. And yeah, so this is a lot of what I do in the day-to-day is helping people with pests and disease issues on vegetables. And so that involves a lot of scouting to understand what we're working with. So firstly, what is scouting? It's, I think a lot of the sort of textbook definitions would be something like a visual inspection of the crop. Basically just to say that you're looking at the plants. Is the short way of putting it. And you're looking for problems usually. So you might be looking for something specific like pests, plant diseases, weeds. You can scout for nutrient issues, and there are all sorts of other things too. And it's usually it's usually targeted in that you're looking for something in particular or a few things in particular. So you might notice other stuff in the process, but there's something that you're one or a few things that you're especially looking out for. So you do, and you're doing it in a way that's realistic for you. That's not going to take all day. You're not searching every single leaf of every single plant. It's not like a detailed survey of everything happening with your plants or of every insect on your plant. You're picking, you might be picking a sample, or finding another way to make it, more efficient than that. And you go, and ideally you go in having an idea of what signs you're looking for. Otherwise, you're sort of going to be, you're just going to be on your phone looking up every single thing that you see. I mean, we've all been there, but ideally, you get an idea of what you're looking for, and it speeds things up. So, basically, just finding a way to do it somewhat quickly, somewhat easily, so that you can fit it into your day or into your week, and you can keep doing it regularly. So it's not too intimidating. It doesn't need to be, really. And why bother with this? Well, for bigger farms, it might be a matter of not spraying as much as they normally would. It might be so that you're waiting until something shows up, or waiting until you have a certain amount of a pest or disease before you respond to it. At a smaller farm, like urban farms and gardens, more often that's probably not what you're doing. So it's more about knowing when the pest has arrived, just having the knowledge, and then for a lot of these, doing something about it. So knowing it's arrived so that you can take some sort of action, or at least you can make a decision about whether to do something. So the example in the photo here is onion thrips. This is pretty common for us in New York. These little specks on onions, and the thrips are tiny little yellow things that you have to look closely to see them, but you can see the damage, and they can be a real problem for onions. But if you catch them early, there's things you can do, and one of the simplest things is just overhead watering. That doesn't kill them, but it slows them down. It literally knocks them under the ground, and they have to climb back up again, and that actually does slow them down. So it's the kind of thing where maybe you weren't doing overhead watering before, but if you're watching for it, you see them, you can do something in response. That's really pretty simple. Another example, this is for disease. We're mostly talking about pests today, but example of doing something by giving up is a way, it can be an action too. So basal downy mildew is a really tough disease of basil that unless you're growing a resistant variety, once you get basal downy mildew, it can wipe out all of your basil in a matter of days sometimes. And so that's one where when you watch for it, when you see it, the action is there's nothing you can really do to stop it, but you can just harvest everything before everything dies. So you have some sort of you have something you can sell, or that you can make in the pest or whatever. So action is not just respond. The action is not just you go out and spray something, right? There are a lot of different ways you can respond to a pest. A lot of different ways that this knowledge could be used. I'm not going to get into this a lot, but just a part of scouting is thresholds, and the idea there being, and this is also a principle of IPM, right, of integrated pest management, which I think has been on the other two sessions you've probably been hearing about already. But the idea being, just because you see something doesn't necessarily mean you have to freak out and take drastic action. You might be able to wait until you see a certain number. For pests, you may say 2 per leaf or something like that. You might have your own threshold of, once we have this many, it's time to do something. So for example, aphids in a garden on a lot of plants, you might wait a while before you really feel like you need to do anything. Like ladybugs and lacewings and other natural enemies might clean them up. That's what happens here in New York City a lot. Is that we'll see a lot of aphids in the spring. By this time of year, there are a lot fewer of them, because then the predators just live in the environment have started eating them and have started catching up. But if you see them in a greenhouse where those predators might not be present, then you might have a lower threshold. So it might be that you only see a few aphids and it's already time to do something about it. So that's what we mean by aggression. But again, the overarching theme being that the sooner you catch it, the sooner you discover that the pest is present, the more options you have to deal with it. So there's some different ways to scout. I'm going to just get into some examples here because I think this is probably more interesting than talking about the sort of theoretical stuff. So some different ways that we could go about scouting. I'm sorry, is anyone getting a lot of background noise from me? Just sitting next to a window with some stuff happening outside that I can't control.
Just a tiny bit, but it's not bad. We can still hear what you're saying.
Okay, I don't think it's going to continue for very long. So some different ways you can scout. You might just do a quick walkthrough. Just walk down a row looking for, this especially works if you're looking for something sort of obvious. So I use cabbage worms as an example. If you're looking for holes in the leaves, you don't need to get in there and inspect every single plant. You could just walk down the row and glance looking for them. For something that's less obvious, that might not work. You might walk down the row and not see the thing. So you might instead pick some plants and and I say semi-random because I don't think this isn't for like, you're not publishing an article on this. It doesn't need to be truly random. You can decide which plants you want to pick, but pick up some different plants at different parts of the row or parts of the farm, and look more closely at those ones. So for example, that's how you might see something like aphids that could be hiding on the underside of the and if you really want to get into it, or if you have like a more serious production situation, this is something that they do in greenhouses a lot, for example, is to use a scouting sheet. So go through and record what you see. So you have a sheet. I have one handy. If people are interested, we can talk about this more later. Most urban farmers aren't probably going to do this, although I think there's also really good education about it. But if you want to talk about more, put it in the chat or ask about it after this. Basically, you have a sheet that puts which pests you're looking for, and each row is a different spot you're scouting, and then you can mark down how many you see, and then that way you have a record of what you've seen throughout the course of the year, and it might be helpful for predicting when it's going to show up next year and seeing how it responds to whatever you do to try and slow it down. So it takes more time, but you get a lot more information. And it might be especially helpful if you're looking for, but if you have a crop where there's multiple pests you're looking for, like brassicas, there are all sorts of pests, as we all know. Squash, you could be looking for squash bugs and squash vine borer, and maybe even cucumber beetles. That's the general idea. But we'll talk more about the other ways of doing it. So some examples of what you might actually see when you go out and look for pests, and how maybe some ideas for specific insects. Aphids could be, I think I wrote aphids on brassicas and then fixed it because aphids, all different types of aphids show up on all different types of plants. But most of the time, they're going to be less obvious in that it's the kind where if you were to just walk down the row glancing at the tops of the plants, you're probably not going to notice, even if you take a lot of aphids before that will be a way of noticing them, because the damage that they cause, at least early on, it can be pretty subtle. Not so subtle later, but in the early going, a lot of times it's not that noticeable. So you're looking for the insects themselves, usually, rather than the damage. So this is one where you would probably do the method of picking a few plants and flipping the leaves, because most of the time, like a lot of insect pests, you're going to be most likely to find them on the underside of the leaf. So going down and picking some plants, flipping some of the leaves, looking for aphids. You can decide for yourself how many is too many, but it at least lets you know that's where to look, basically. Yeah, and then you can decide on sort of your own threshold for what to do next. So another example would be with cabbage worms. For these, they're more obvious, right? You see holes in the leaf. So this is one where you could walk down the road and just look for holes in the leaves. And that tells you something. Something is eating the leaves. But there are other things that can cause holes, but usually it's that. If it's something like kale or collards or broccoli or cabbage. The caterpillars themselves are pretty well camouflaged. You can see there's one in this picture here, but it's not something you would have noticed just walking past, right? And they a lot of times are also on the leaf undersides. This one's on the top, but a lot of times they're not. So you walk through, look for the holes, and then to confirm that it is a cabbage worm. And by the way, I use the term cabbage worm as in just caterpillars that eat brassicas. There are basically 4 different species that I would think of as a cabbage worm. I think probably all 4 of them are, and we have 4 that show up sometimes here. We probably have the same 4 in Ohio, or maybe one swapped in for the other. The one in this picture is imported cabbage worm, which is the one that's everywhere. And when you see the little white butterflies with the black dot on the wing, cabbage whites, this is the caterpillar of that. And that's a type of scouting too. You could be watching for the butterflies for that one, but there are other cabbage worms that are for moths that fly at night. You wouldn't see the adult. So again, it's like checking for damage is probably the most reliable way to do that. A reason to flip the leaf, even if you see holes, to not assume. I just noticed that the picture in the middle there on the left has ignore the what's that, a soldier fly or a robber fly? Ignore that. That just happens to be there. The damage on the left is flea beetle, on I think topsoil, and same picture on the right of the cabbage worm. And the idea being that not all holes in the leaf mean the same thing. So a lot of times, little round holes on brassicas, a lot of times little round holes are flea beetles, big smooth edge holes are a lot of times caterpillars, and sort of rough edged holes, like that have been sort of rasped instead of chewed. That makes sense. Sometimes those are slugs or snails, although it could still be caterpillars. So that's all to say that looking for holes in leaves, it does tell you something, but there still might be a reason once you see the holes to flip the leaf and look for, or just to look more closely to see if you can find the insect itself. Because there is a difference. Like if you were to go and, I mean, if your approach is to go and pick off the caterpillars, then you're not going to find any. If you look at the picture on the left, you're just not going to find any caterpillars. And if you're trying to like spray some neem oil or some soaps or oils or something, that doesn't do much at all for flea beetles because it just rolls right off their backs. But for the smallest caterpillars, it might do something. So the approach would be different depending on what pest it is. Bonus mission: find the eggs before they hatch. You don't have to do this. This is very difficult to do. But if you're checking leaves, that is one of the things that, extra information might be interesting to know. If you know what the eggs look like. Again, it's just more information. You know what's on its way. And you can pick off the little eggs, but it's going to take all day if you're trying to pick off all the eggs. Okay, another example, spinach leaf miner. I didn't ask if you have it in, I think it's in Ohio. It has to be. There are other leaf miners. I grew up in Ohio, and some of these are things that I remember. And okay, yeah,
it's there. Yeah.
Okay, I thought I remembered it. So it shows up on the spinach, chard, beets, anything in that family potentially. And this is one where, again, it's the damage itself is fairly obvious. You don't have to necessarily pick random plants. You could just walk down the room and look for it, but it's not really obvious unless you know what you're looking for. So it's one where it's good to get familiar with it. So what you're looking for are these tracks. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but well, you can see it in the picture. But there's sort of like a wiggly little track, and it turns into these blotches. And that's because the adult is a fly that's very nondescript. You probably won't ever see it. The eggs are tricky to see unless you know to look for them. and then the larvae hatch from the eggs and leaf burrow in between the layers of the leaf. So you aren't going to see that either, but you will see the damage. And if you catch it early, you can pick off the leaves and get rid of them, or just squish them up, because the larvae, if you get it early enough, the larvae is still in there, and that helps to slow down how many you get in the future. It doesn't save that leaf necessarily. You can eat the rest of it. You could eat the whole leaf, I'm sure. Don't quote me on that, but can't imagine that anything wrong with eating spinach leaf miner larvae. The point is, there's something you can do about it, right? You can pick off the leaf early. If you wait too long, then the larvae drops out into the soil and pupates, and then you get more. And a few weeks later, you get another generation. Another example where you don't have to, where you could walk down and scout for it, and it makes a difference, whether to catch it early. This, if you see some of it, you could start checking leaves. This is what the eggs look like. That's a very tricky, again, like it would be very tricky to catch all the eggs, but just so you know, that's what they look like. I'm not gonna I spend a lot of time on this one in New York City. I'm not gonna spend too much time on it because you might not be seeing it. But I'm gonna talk about it as an example. So two-spotted spider mite is our biggest pest of tomatoes, and for a lot of people, cucumbers and eggplants and beans in New York City. It's a pest that a lot of areas in the South too, and it's a pest in greenhouses and indoor growing, and in high tunnels in the Midwest also, because they like hot, dry conditions. For us, it's a pest of tomatoes all over the city, indoor or outdoor. And it's hard to notice. The mites themselves are very tiny, so it's very hard to actually see them. And the symptoms are hard because tomatoes have so many leaves that it could be that picture on the top is like his early signs, but that's one of, I don't know, 50 leaves on that tomato, or 50 leaflets on that tomato plant, or more, so it's very tricky to catch it early. But at the same time, if you don't catch it early, then you might be too late to do one of the sort of, it's a tough pest to deal with in general, but one of the methods that shows promise is releasing these predatory mites, persimilis mites, which attack two-spotted spider mite. But if you wait too long to release them, then it might not work. So they need to not fall too far behind. So this is one where really watching for it at the right, early on, is important. And that's a lot of times going to be true for other things where what you want to do is to release a beneficial insect, like a natural a predator or a parasite, that a parasitoid wasp or something like that. You might need to catch the pest earlier in order for it to be effective. Yeah, so this is a two-spotted spider mite. Look like under magnification, like 10 times, at least 10 times magnified. Very difficult to see unless you know to look for them. So that's why the damage is what we're looking for, rather than the bugs themselves. And I mean, they're not bugs; they're arthropods. They're not actually insects, but you get the idea. So you do, one of the ways for you just to walk through the tomatoes, check for visual signs. But this is one where ideally you would also pick some plants, especially at the ends of the rows where a lot of times they show up first, and to look more closely for this. Stippling is the name for the little on the slide, the little light colored flecks. It's called stippling. But ideally you want to see it at what looks like in the top picture, but by the time it gets to what it looks like in the bottom picture, it might be too late to release mites, and it might be too late to do much of anything. And so I just thought, because it's kind of interesting, it's not something that works for a lot of pests or a lot of situations, but it just gives you an example of how to get creative about scouting. Sentinel plants, this is something we tried out here. Other people had been trying out. Two-spotted spider mite is hard to see on tomatoes. Everything is hard to see on tomatoes. If you've ever tried to find like a tomato hornworm, you know that it's there because you see holes, you see just like it looks like the entire leaf is gone. You see stuff missing, and by the time you see this, the caterpillar is giant. It's really hard to find stuff. Tomatoes are a jungle. It's really hard to scout them for pests. Beans are way easier to scout. I mean, look at how much smaller they are. Their leaves are so nice and flat and open. And two-spotted spider mite happens to really like beans, and so usually you'll see it on the beans before you see them with tomatoes. So you use them as this sort of sentinel plant, like the canary in the coal mine idea, where you put them at the ends of the rows and of tomatoes, and you can check the bean leaves. You can look more closely at the bean leaves. It doesn't take as much time. And that way, when you see the spider mite on the beans, you know you probably also have it in the tomatoes and can take action for them. So that's the last. I'll leave it with that example, and hopefully that leaves plenty of time for questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, sorry, Sam, you just cut out for just a second. So you're
Oh.
you're all wrapped up, ready for questions, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Did I cut out before that or just then?
Just then when you're
Okay.
doing your closing, basically.
Yeah, that's all it was.
All right, well, yeah, if you have questions for Sam, and hopefully it's not my internet, but if you have questions for Sam, please put them in the chat box. And we'll read them off and make sure they get answered. One question that came in a little bit earlier was more just about the presentation. Are we going to get to, how to treat for pests today? And my answer was, we might just touch on it, but we can give some good resources on that. In terms of, the crucial nature of IDing the insect, and scouting is the way to do it, right? Sam, I don't know if you have any kind of, if you could describe the steps you would take after that to get to the treatment.
Yeah. Well, you're right. Knowing which pest it is an important first step, because what you do next depends on which pest it is. For some of them, you don't have to get super detailed. So like that's why we say cabbage worms instead of listing each of the 3 or 4 different types of caterpillar. All of them you would handle the same general way. And aphids, you don't have to know whether it's potato aphid or a cabbage, cotton melon aphid, or you don't necessarily have to know that, because you would treat them all the same general way. I think, yeah. So, but having an idea of what type of pest is going to damage.
Absolutely. We got a couple questions.
That's why I pulled up the screen share, because I saw one of the questions was about these 3.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us what those are?
Yeah, these are, and all the photos except for 2, I guess, in the slideshow are ones that I took around New York City on farms and gardens. So the one on the left is a yellow striped armyworm, pretty sure, which is just one of these caterpillars that shows up and nibbles on just about anything. That there's on a tomato, but I've seen it on a bunch of different things. And if not that, then there's a really similar armyworm, definitely a couple. The middle one is pigweed flea beetle, and that's definitely also present in Ohio, but it's not usually thought of as a pest because it eats pigweed, and who cares about that, except if you're growing leaf amaranth, or here they'd mostly be called callaloo. So a lot of the farmers in New York City are from the Caribbean, or else they're serving a Caribbean community, and they're in a Caribbean neighborhood, and callaloo is a very popular crop. A very popular food in the Caribbean, and not something that's easy to buy here. And it's not the same as pigweed. It's related, but you can eat it in a way that you can't eat pigweed. And pigweed flea beetle loves it. So anyway, that's one that we have here. There's like no reason. I found one person who's ever seemed to research it in the US. So we don't really know what to do about it. And the one on the right is also one that's sort of we have it here. I don't think it's in Ohio yet. Harlequin bug. It's a southern pest, but it's been moving north with warming weather. Presumably that's why. So it's been here for a while, but maybe no more than 10 years here. But it's one of our main brassica pests here.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And the other question was, and this is an interesting area that I think research is still being done on, but what about using growing degree days to anticipate pest problems? I guess especially in vegetables.
Yeah, Betsy might have more to say about that than I do. That's not what I haven't really been doing that, but I know that is the way that a lot of people do things. I think that it does work for some pests. For others, others are a lot more predictable, and it can be a lot more local. But yeah, I think that is a helpful way to think about it. And Betsy, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, the one thing is sometimes we don't know what the growing degree day models are. We don't know what growing degree days to look for the stages of all the insects on vegetable crops. I'm trying to think if there's some growing degree day models that are for vegetable crops in NUA, the Northeast Weather. No, it used to be Northeast Weather Advisory. Now it's I'll have to look it up. I'll have to send you the link for NUA. It's mainly a weather application, but it has models in it. And we put in, for example, conifer pest models that are based on growing degree days. Now, the other thing is you can start doing it yourself if you keep track of when you start seeing certain pests and look up the growing degree days for your area and start keeping track of them. And Ohio actually has a really good system with growing degree days and also phenology of what's blooming at those growing degree days. So even if you didn't know exactly for your pest, if you start seeing it, you could look back on that Ohio list and see what's blooming then and what the growing degree days are for that time.
Absolutely. I'll make sure to share that too.
And I'll send Maggie, I'll send you the NUA link.
Okay. And we'll share those out in the follow-up email. And this is a quick question. We can work it in now or hold it till later.
That's a great question.
But the question is, has climate change affected pest problems?
I mean, yes. I think we can say that pretty safely.
It's like the Harlequin bug.
Exactly. That's one of my favorite examples of in New York City is Harlequin bug. I'll just pull it up because it's nicer to look at that picture while we're talking about it. That one on the right, Harlequin bug, that was a common pest in the Southeast. I think it's native to the Southeast US. And it's not something we think about seeing in the Northeast. When I started working here in New York City, I was seeing this and was asking colleagues upstate about it. Like, so what do you do about Harlequin bug? This seems really tricky. And they're like, what bug? Because it's just not there at all. And it's a much warmer climate in New York City. So I think this is an argument I make when I'm writing grant proposals, but I think it's also true, is that because of the city is warmer, because of all the human-made surfaces, all the asphalt stuff releases solar energy over nighttime. The nighttime lows are much warmer, so cold winters are supposed to kill off certain things, but they don't kill them off in the city. Harlequin bug is one of those where, like, if you get a cold winter, they shouldn't be able to survive it, but they do survive it in the city. At least they have pockets where they survive. So we have stuff the stuff that we have now is probably going to be it's probably going to keep moving north, right? Other people are going to have it soon too. So we're getting it first, and we get to play around with it before everyone else gets it. There are a few others. Cabbage whitefly is one that's a big another brassica pest here that is not upstate New York, but is pretty common in the mid-Atlantic. That's non-native. That's only been in the US for 15 years or something. And there's very little research on it, but it's spreading, and that's maybe partly climate, maybe partly just it hasn't had an opportunity to spread. Two-spotted spider mite is the same way. It likes hot, dry weather. We're getting hotter and drier. Just this week, a couple of weeks ago, we had another heat wave. It was in the mid-90s all week, no rain the whole week, so populations exploded. So yeah, I think the answer is yes. I think we have some in the city. We might have some more extreme examples. Things sort of happen faster. The environment might be a little more extreme. So
You're a warning system.
What was that?
You're our early warning system. And I
Yeah.
say that not as a joke. I mean, I say it about Long Island and so forth too, because
Mhm.
even just in a normal situation, it's warmer there. So we'll see things happen there first. And if you're talking about scouting, we like to know what's going on in the city because it will eventually get to, I'm in Ithaca, so it will eventually get to us and then up to the colder parts of the state. So it is one of the things too, is like pay attention, know where your warmer spots are and pay attention to what's going on there as part of your scouting program. And I
Yeah.
thought I should explain, if not everybody knows what growing degree days are. It's a method of looking at insect development based on how much heat we've had, assuming that both plants and insects develop faster or slower depending on what the temperatures are. And it does actually fit into that climate change piece as well, because if you're using a consistent number of growing degree days, then if the climate is warming, you'll reach that number of growing degree days sooner than you would have before. Now you have dangerous to have us both here because
No, this is great. But yes, for time's sake, I think you should get started, Betsy, so we can fit your whole presentation in here.
I'll try not to talk really, really fast.
Thank you.
You see that? All right, everyone. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about trapping. And so it ties in perfectly with scouting because it is one of the ways you can actually do some scouting. And this is a picture of a trap in New York City urban farm that we have an intern, and you'll see his name. It's on some of the pictures, named Jensen and Jaggi. And he took this picture of it is a pitfall trap, which I'll explain more later, with a little rainout shelter over, but it looks kind of like a little space station that's landed in the vegetable plot. So we always have to start out with the first question is why do this? So why should you trap insects? Why do you want to catch them? And the first piece is because we want to know what we have. And so in terms of scouting, sometimes you can make it easier by having a way of actually either attracting them or catching them in a place that you might not always see them otherwise. And then sometimes people will also trap insects to actually reduce the numbers. It's not as common, it's a little bit more complicated, but it is a possibility. And if I'll get somebody to wave their hands or jump them down, or Maggie will shout if I'm talking too fast, because I can do that. So I'm going to talk about some types of traps and then what they catch, and then some other methodologies as well. So sticky cards is something that, we think about them. So I work on ornamentals mostly, and I do have a project on some urban gardens in New York City with Sam. But in greenhouses, we use a lot of sticky cards. And so I'll ask this question and then I'll keep talking about it and see if anyone has an answer for it. Why are there two colors here? Is color important, or why might color be important? And so we're looking at what they catch, and because they're up above the crop usually, they are more likely to catch flying insects. So we don't find crawling insects on them very much. For example, if you have aphids in the early stage, before they actually form wings, and in some cases they never form wings, you won't find aphids on your sticky cards as a way. So it's not a good trap for an aphid. But let's see, we have something in chat. Did somebody answer?
No, I was prodding the crowd to see if anyone would answer.
If they're awake. And so I will answer those. Yes, it is. It is sort of. And so you will find that people will sell, I used to sell hot pink for some insect. Thrips are considered to be more attracted to blue than yellow. But if you're going to use them, I would suggest using yellow, because most things are attracted to yellow. Most insects are attracted to yellow. And it took me a long time to think about why. But if you think about a plant that's stressed, it actually often has yellow leaves, and those are attractive to insects because sometimes stressed plants they can feed on more easily than they can the really vigorous, healthy ones. This is also the world's best Halloween costume. Someone I know went as a sticky trap with all the associated insects on it. Oops, let's see if I have to make it move. What have I done? Oh, I have to click on it probably. There we go. And I sort of mentioned this before in terms of placement. This card is really too high. What you want is what's right down in the crop. I mean, some things will fly high over them, but many things are going to be more likely to be flying around where they want to land. And so you're more likely to catch them in closer to the foliage or in closer to the parts of the plants you're interested in. They're also messy and they're sticky, and I've always get my hair stuck in them. But they work really well, and this is a typical way you might attach them is with a clothespin. These are some sticky traps that are actually at a farm in New York City at Oko Farms. And one of the questions I have is how many? So here you see you've got one stuck in this grow bag, and here there's one in almost every plant. At this level, usually in a greenhouse, you wouldn't see them this frequently. This might actually be an attempt to trap some of the insects and actually reduce the population, to catch enough that you're actually limiting the development of the population. But it may also just be, we need this many to actually see what is out here, and we get enough variation from plant to plant that we want to put one in each plant. But this is something else in terms of why sticky cards are sometimes a problem if they're outside. And you can see here, this is a sticky card, and it looks like some of those little spots are insects, but then sometimes some of the big ones are dirt and dust, especially if you're in a dusty location. The sticky cards will get covered with dust and they're no longer sticky, or they're just not picking up enough insects to make a difference. This is a type of sticky trap that they would use in a greenhouse where they are actually trying to catch all the insects. And you can imagine how messy that gets because it's sticky over the whole surface and on both sides. But in terms of reducing numbers, having more area is important. But I think something like this outside in an urban garden would be a waste of money because it would get dirty too fast. So, and because we're on chat, it's a little hard to get questions answered. So I will probably answer most of them. And at the end, so you could be thinking about if there's anything that you've done, because that's the big question that I'd like to know what you've tried. So what does the sticky card tell you? Well, you'd say there's a lot of insects, but what's missing on this card is a date. So you don't know whether this card has been out there for an hour, a day, or 2 months. And if it's out there for an hour and you've got this many insects, you've got a problem. If it's been out for a month, you don't know. The numbers might be going up, the numbers might be coming down. And so the other thing about sticky cards is you need to check them and at least make a note of kind of how many insects are on them so that you know the next time you look whether the number has increased. Because just knowing, I mean, they'll tell you presence. In this case, you'll know that you have something. But in terms of knowing what your population is doing, which is what you're interested in terms of depending on whether you need to do something about that population, putting a date on them is really important. So here are some types of traps that we've tried using in the urban gardens. And again, we're actually looking at these as a way of identifying what's present. Both, in fact, we're looking at them both for pest insects and also for beneficial insects. And we also catch a bunch of other things too, just because of the way they're set up, and not so much for reducing the numbers. So pitfall traps are meant to catch insects that are walking along the soil surface. So there are lots of ground beetles in terms of beneficial insects that are out in almost any farm, but you might never know that because you don't see them, because they're walking along the soil surface and they'll be under the plants and in amongst the leaves, and you might never know they're there, but they're actually doing a lot of beneficial work for you and killing some of the bad guys, like larvae that live in the soil and so forth. So in this case, you have a trap that's below the surface of the soil and something to keep the rain out of it with some soapy water in it. And Amara Dunn is our biological control specialist for New York State Integrated Pest Management. And so she's very good at creating all these designs. So I'm using hers. Whoops, do it again. This is just to show how we set it up. We actually dig the hole and these are just deli cups. We put one in the soil and leave it there because what we want to be able to do is put a second one in with soapy water in it. And here it is once it's all set up on the right. And then we want to be able to take this one out because we're going to collect the insects that are in there so that we can identify them. And we're actually keeping records of what we find. But if you're interested in knowing what you've got, you need to look at them, take them out of the soapy water and look at them and see if you can figure that out. So I did say, how many of these would you actually need to do to actually reduce a population? I think it would be almost untenable. I think you'd have to have way too many to make it make sense. And just to give you an idea of what we're kind of catching, as I said, they catch things that crawl along the ground. So it's not surprising to see that we're getting slugs and ground beetles. It is a little interesting to find ants, would be not surprising, but it's a little bit interesting to see how many wasps we're getting and flies because we don't necessarily expect them to be attracted there. So you can catch different things with different kinds of traps, even things you're not exactly expecting. The other type that we commonly use are pan traps. They're yellow and blue, again, the same colors as those sticky cards because those colors are attractive to insects. They catch flying insects, they do catch bees. And so it's one of those things of we're doing it just for 2 days at a time, once a month. So we're not catching the great majority of bees. And that's something you might think about if you're doing this kind of trapping, how often you do it, when you do it, and how long you leave the traps out, because we don't really want to catch bees, excuse me, any more than we have to. And again, just because we're keeping data, you can see bees are the biggest things and wasps that we're catching. But again, how did a slug just decided to climb up in there, or the caterpillars decided to climb up in there, even though it wasn't aimed at catching them? So here it is. This is what it would look like in one of the garden beds in New York City. So we've got the 2 pan traps and the pitfall trap in a plot, vegetable plot, just to see what we've got there. And so we're looking at the population, not determining, well, to some extent, the level of the population, how many we see, but also what we're finding. Excuse me for a moment. Don't know what's going on. Maybe because I haven't talked much lately. So the second thing that I'm going to talk about is trap crops in a different way of both identifying what you have and then also being able to control it. So they're most often used in sort of this sort of large scale. You can use them in large and small scale, but to actually reduce the population of a pest. So they're actually a control mechanism or management mechanism, not just a monitoring mechanism. So the idea is that what you need is a plant that is attractive to the whatever pest it is you're interested in. In fact, more attractive than the crop that you're growing. So it may be that it's a different cultivar of the same one. In this bottom one, this is a chrysanthemum greenhouse. These are the ones that are blooming are the trap crops. The other ones are not yet blooming. These may be more attractive because of the variety, but they also may be more attractive, in this case, to thrips because they're flowering, and thrips like flowers and pollen. So it could be a different stage of them. It could be a different plant entirely. The above one, the upper one is also, we were looking at thrips and managing thrips using a trap crop in a greenhouse that had mostly vegetable transplants in it. But it's not just enough to put them out. You actually have to manage them because they will attract the pests, but they won't hold them necessarily the whole time. So you have to do something with those plants in order to manage the insect populations. So I thought I would show you, this is a greenhouse example, but it's a really nice example of how effective a trap crop can be. So in this case, in this greenhouse is a bench with the red dots are poinsettias. And in this other greenhouse, the one with the trap plant, they're all poinsettias, but the green dots are eggplants. And greenhouse whiteflies, which is a particular species of whiteflies, there are other ones, but greenhouse whiteflies love eggplants. And so John Sanderson actually released 1,500 whiteflies in his greenhouse, in each greenhouse here in the center of the bench. Don't try this at home, as we say. And so the question is, when you put them here in the middle, where are they going to go? And they measured where they went. So this is the control. So you can see it's pretty random. There's a couple of hot spots. Why there's a hot spot on this side, who knows? And another little hot spot there. But look at the ones where you have the eggplants. Almost all of the bench with the poinsettias is at 0. And the whiteflies are concentrated right on those trap crops. It's not that they're all entirely on the trap crop, but they're in that vicinity. So because you've got them concentrated, now if you're going to do something to treat them, either a beneficial or a pesticide, you only have to treat this area where they are. And I'd probably, whoops, if I can go backwards. I'd go out a little beside outside of this square and this square, but for the most part, you don't have to treat the whole area. So from an IPM point of view, it gives you the possibility of using a variety of IPM tools for management, but reducing, especially if you're using pesticides, reducing the amount of pesticide that you have to use because you're not trying to spray everything. And for that matter, even reducing the number of beneficials that you need to use because they're expensive, because again, you're putting them where the pests are and not across the board. So there's a lot of trap cropping that's used in vegetable crops, probably more so than anything else. And sometimes it's identifying the crop that's a good trap crop for the crop you're trying to grow. So in this case, this is the cash crop. It looks like another kind of cucurbit, but they were using Blue Hubbard as the trap crop. And I'm trying to think what they were. I think it was for squash bugs in this case, that they like the Blue Hubbard better than they liked this other cucurbit. And you can see in a large scale field operation, they've got Blue Hubbard here, and they don't have it again until perhaps farther halfway down the field. So you don't have to have them every other plant or anything as dramatic as that. And sometimes they put them around the perimeter more so than even in the middle of it. So especially if it's a pest that moves in from the outside, by putting them around the perimeter of the field, and sometimes you'll see a square of something blooming with something green inside, that as they move in, they get trapped by the trap crop, and then they don't move into the crop itself. This is information out of Missouri, and this, I think, sometimes we see more in the South than we see up here. But you can also do the same sort of thing. In this case, they put it, this is another Blue Hubbard, which looks pretty ratty, but they've put it in a pot. And so you don't have to have it planted in your field. You could actually put it in a pot and put it maybe even somewhere in an area where you're not even trying to grow. It's just, but it will attract whatever the pest is away from your crop. And that's kind of what we did with this, with these marigolds in the greenhouse. So the big question is knowing what to use. And so I was looking to see what I could find. And so I happen to have mustard for harlequin bugs. Obviously, this came out of the South. Nasturtium for aphids, marigolds for thrips, Hubbard squash for some of the pests of other cucurbits, okra or sorghum or sunflower for stink bugs or leaf-footed bugs. This one I found very interesting. This is the wild evening primrose. There are commercial, I was going to say, but ornamental evening primrose also. But this is the wild one, which actually is considered a weed. I have it in my garden because there's a particular moth that likes it, and I was waiting to see if I could get some. But it's very attractive to Japanese beetles. And so again, if you can pull them away from the things that you don't want them on and do something to control them here, even if you're just picking them off of those plants, that it works to keep the damage from your crop. But the other thing that you might be able to use is, what do you already know in your garden or your field that attracts pests? And so could you put it out a little bit earlier? So you start some and have them in pots, and you'll put those out earlier than the ones that are growing. So you can kind of vacuum up some of those pests before the other crop gets going. Or do you know that they always, sometimes it's even a variety difference. If you found this variety is very attractive to this pest, and we grow some others that are not so much, that you might use that as a trap crop. So sometimes it works best to pay attention to what's in your field or in your garden or farm, and see what's already happening there and use that, because you know that it works then. So this comes back to the point that you have to manage these. And again, this is in a greenhouse, but you have to do something with that trap plant once it's attracted the pest, because otherwise they will move off eventually. So in this case, here's where they were using those flowering chrysanthemums again. In this case, he's actually applying beneficial mites that will feed on the thrips, cucumerous mites that will feed on the thrips that have been attracted to these chrysanthemums. The other thing is, sometimes you have to have a continuing set of plants to use to bring new ones in. In this case, what they've done, and they set it up this way, so they put the plants in these flats, and they actually put them sitting in plastic bags so that they can pull the plastic bag up over the crop, over that trap plant. So when they carry it out of the greenhouse, it doesn't spread those pests off to wherever they're walking. So in that case, they will bag that, take it out, but they need another one to come in to start the process again. So there is work involved with using trap crops. And there is also, you still need the management point. And the same thing, they could spray this with a pesticide and then leave, don't spray the rest of the greenhouse. But because they like to use beneficials, that's what they were doing. So I wondered if anyone had suggestions, either have questions or have suggestions for what they think would work as a trap crop in their own farms. And I will also send this link. This is a nice article on how to use trap crops. So I'll send that to Maggie.
Great. Yeah, I'll definitely include that on the summary email I send out. But yeah, if you have any ideas of what you've used in the past, please put that in the chat box. You can also raise your hand if you'd like to explain, and it just seems too much to type in the chat box. And I'll ask you to unmute, and that way we can kind of hear you.
And I just
Hear
put
you
my
live.
email address in the chat box also, because I wasn't as smart as Sam as to put it on the last slide.
Got it. You have any questions? I know in terms of when I've been growing, sometimes people use arugula as a trap crop for flea beetle.
Yep.
The mustard flea beetle in particular, but it's hard because arugula is usually what you want to grow too.
Right.
It's the best crop.
And you can't guarantee when they're going to come in. And so, I mean, it's hard to say, oh, plant it early and then, you know, it'll come into there, but now when you plant your arugula that you actually want to harvest, it's there already. So yes, it is very attractive. And I see someone put radish to attract cabbage moth from kale. And that's another good one. You know, and again, radish is a crop that you might want to be growing. So there's a trade-off there always. And so we also have the trade-off that if you're putting in something else, like if you're putting, you know, sorghum in to attract stink bugs, that's land that you're not growing on. And a lot of urban farms, space is really at a premium, and is you know, that's kind of the value of the space may be such that it's hard to want to put it into something that you're not actually harvesting. Any other questions? Or if you have questions for Sam, we can let Sam talk.
Yeah, any other questions about anything we've talked about today? I think another great thing about the traps is that you could take a sticky card straight to your extension educator too, right? So it's a great way to really capture the evidence and get a real identification.
And you can wrap them in saran wrap, which makes it a lot easier to transport them. We try to keep the bubbles out, but usually we can see through the saran wrap well enough with a microscope that you can still get them identified.
Absolutely. And I know it's a common question, but I'll ask it because you touched on it a little bit, but what about beneficials in the garden, and like what's that cost benefit analysis in terms of putting out sticky traps when you're thinking about that?
Well, you can catch beneficials on sticky traps. Usually what we try and do then is do some time differential. So if you're going to put beneficials in the garden, and I'll talk about sort of that in another second, but if you're going to put them in when you've got sticky traps, just put them out, but without the sticky traps, and then in a few days, bring the sticky traps back in so that you're not catching them. And we have examples in a greenhouse where everybody thinks everything's pretty close together. You'll see a sticky card attached to the same place where they're releasing the insects. Okay, that's ridiculous. Don't do that.
Bad idea.
Space and time is better. The other thing about releasing beneficials in the outside, one, there's already a lot of things already there. And some things, when you release them, they will go find, you know, the biggest, best buffet and smorgasbord, and it might not be your farm. So if you're putting out something like lady beetles, they can fly. Now, if you're putting out something like predatory mites, they have to walk, and it's a lot. They're more likely to stay where you put them. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, that exactly that. With ladybugs, it's got to be it's easy to get a hold of ladybugs you can just release, but the ones that you get from like a hardware store that you can get online, a lot of times they just take off, and that's it's kind of fun, and you know, maybe they're helping somebody else, but a lot of times I think also a lot of times they're convergent lady beetles from the West Coast, and they just have which is like a species that sort of migrates to the hills, and is a whole very interesting thing. So it's like they're programmed to leave, sort of. is what I was told. But there are exceptions. So like we've been trying a lady beetle called Delphastus catalina, which is a white fly.
Little black one.
Yeah, tiny little black lady beetle. We just started trying that out outdoors for cabbage whitefly, because we are trying to figure out what to do about it, and they use it in greenhouses, as Betsy obviously knows, but it had never been tried before in cabbage whitefly, so in a field setting. So So in order to hopefully keep it from just flying away, even though there's a lot of food right there, we put some row cover over it when we release it for just like a week. So that hopefully there's or a week to 2 weeks, so that hopefully there's enough time for them to settle down, lay some eggs.
Yep.
Maybe they leave after that, but at least they lay some eggs first.
Right.
And
Quick
so
question
that's
the
another
other
way
day
to do it.
about getting cryptolamus, which is mealybug destroyer, but to get it as a larval stage instead of the adult, because the larvae will stay put more because they can't fly yet. There is one that gets used outside a lot for sweet corn, which is trichogramma, used for European corn borer. And it's a little wasp that flies around and lays an egg in the egg of European corn borer, and then the larva develops in the egg, and it kills the egg so that you don't get any larvae hatching out. And that one is, because there's not much indoor sweet corn, so that one's used almost exclusively outside. The other thing is you have to have there's lots of beneficials that are there already, and many of them are not sold commercially because either we haven't figured out how to rear them, or there's not enough money in it if we do. And so there's some amazing things that you can find. And I've seen examples where you had something in a greenhouse and it was covered with pests, you put it outside and it will get cleaned up in a jiffy. It's amazing how fast they'll clean things up. The other thing is to learn what you're looking for. So if someone put the word beneficials with a question mark, so biological control, beneficials, there's various names we use for them, is to start looking when you're scouting. You can also look for the ones that actually show something. So if you've got aphids that are parasitized, they often will turn sort of brownish, tannish, and they look like they've been puffed up or pumped up. And then if you're lucky, you'll see a little hole cut in the back end where the wasp came out again. So that means if you see those, you've got biological control going on in your garden already. Some of the whitefly, there's some whitefly parasitoids that are little wasps. And that's the scales, they call them, but the pupae turn black. And so that might be something else you'd see, or caterpillars with the little cocoons along, like tomato hornworm with the little cocoons along the back. So you know that you've got the biological control going out there. Can you tell I like talking about biocontrol? I've gone over your time limit.
No, not at all. And I just wanted to say that to people that we are past our time. So if you do have to leave, we understand, but we will, stick around and answer a couple more questions if there are any, but it's looking like it kind of slowed down in the chat box. So
Milky
There's a question
spore.
about, but I don't have, that's all you Betsy. I don't have
So milky spore is it's a fungus, I believe, that's applied to the soil, and it gets it works on grubs, and so it's something that is sometimes used for Japanese beetle. One of the problems for most of New York City is probably actually a place it might work, but in much of New York it's too cold, and so it doesn't work very well here. Farther south of us, and I don't know, do you know in Ohio how well it works?
I don't, but I can look into it.
Yeah, and so and you could use it in combination, but that's a good point, is that some of these biological controls, we use multiple ones because we're trying to get different stages. So if you're getting grubs with milky spore in the soil, there might be, not recommended in Northeast Ohio. So you may have the same problem that we do. But so when we're looking at something like thrips management, we use a little predatory mite, and it has to get the up to first or second instar, because once they're bigger than that, they'll just flick the mite away with their tails. But then we use nematodes in the soil because they pupate in the soil. So we're kind of, a two-pronged approach is always good, because if you could hit more than one stage, you've got a better chance of getting ahead of the population. Somebody said they had good luck with it, but 4 years seems like the max. So is that just applying it once every 4 years, or just doing it 4 years in a row? Carol. So there are some nematodes that are used also for, yes, every 3 to 4 years. Nematodes that we use for grub control also. One of the big problems we see is that because the beetles fly so much, that the larvae might be somewhere else. We have a farm on campus that had ornamentals, and it used to be filled with Japanese beetles for our field day, but the larvae were probably over in the irrigated golf course next door, because they like irrigated soil.
She was interested in what nematodes.
Well, look them up.
Okay, and then Lois said that she understood that milky spore took several years to kind of build up and spread and be effective. So I guess that
Yeah.
might also reinforce the fact that if it's too cold, you know, it's not able to do that.
Instead, I think our soils are too cold, and that's kind of why. Let's see. I can see it. So the ones that I'm seeing are Steinernema glaciarii and Heterorhabditis bacteriophora. I'm going to put it in the chat because there's no way you can write that down with me mispronouncing it. It's interesting, but it gave me something entirely different. Let's see.
I've heard people having good luck with putting nematodes and applying them to the soil for flea beetles also, where in that case, timing is important because it's not, it doesn't do anything to the adults. It's because the larval stage of flea beetles is in the soil, certain target.
Right. Yeah, so that's something else. You need to know an awful lot of biology sometimes to know where your pest is when and what will work on it. I was going to see if I can find the new. So this says Heterorhabditis is commercially available.
And what pest was that for again? That was for
That was Japanese beetles.
Japanese beetles.
And usually it works on other beetles of the same type, so white grubs.
That could be
So this
useful.
is the website that has, the new is the website that has growing degree day models for some things, and I'm not sure what they have for
Okay.
vegetable crops. Well, they have a lot of apple. And some of them are, the models are not based on growing degree days, they're based on temperature and rainfall and humidity sometimes. But onion maggot, for example, does have a degree day. I'm just looking at the website and see that there are some. Oh, a top takeaway summary message. You want to go first, Sam?
Well, just noticing the one above that from Lois about marigolds. I don't know anything about whether marigolds have properties against nematodes, but I know that in practice that the concept makes sense if they do, because the same thing is done with mustards, where mustards will be grown as a cover crop. If there was a root rot nematode or root knot nematode problem in an area, you can grow certain mustards as a cover crop and then incorporate them into the soil as they break down. They have chemicals that that nematodes don't like, and so I don't know.
Marigolds do work. But in the Netherlands, they grow marigolds in some in between crops to manage the nematodes.
Okay.
And then marigolds also have the above ground parts have beneficial effects too, in that they repel certain insects. And so that's when you do interplanting with marigolds, you get, you're looking at a different stage of it, or probably even a different insect or a different pest. But they have multiple methods of being useful.
So top takeaway summary message. It's a good but hard question.
I thought of one, so I'll go first, and then you can keep thinking.
Go. Yeah.
So mine is that using either trap crops or traps is a way to help you with monitoring and identifying what you've got. So it's a way to make it easier as part of a scouting program to see what pests you have.
I think the same is sort of true for scouting in general. I guess for scouting, like for scouting on the plants, I think it's just a good thing it's good practice to get into, just to try and do it every week or something like that. Because even if you aren't seeing the thing that you thought you were looking for, you're seeing something. You're getting a feel for what's going on with your plants. So you're getting information, like you're learning something every time you do it.
And I think the other point that you made at the very beginning, which is perfect, is you'll find it sooner. And the sooner you find something, the easier it is to control. Yeah. So if you're waiting until you're seeing massive damage on the plant, you may be too late, or you're too late for that plant at least. So Yeah, so I think, and the concept of it, make it a habit. Make it fun. You go out there and look at all, most of us who are growing plants are kind of plant geeks anyway, so going out and looking is part of the fun. I
Absolutely.
started scouting for Branching Out, which is an IPM newsletter for ornamentals, and started scouting at my yard. And it's fascinating because I never saw all that stuff before, and it's all been out there. So
That's what I tell people. Take your glass of wine, take your coffee or tea, depending on what time of the day you have to do it, and yeah, make it a habit.
and I've got to is stop moving.
Hmm.
So look at something for a little while, and pretty soon you'll realize, especially things like pollinators, like you can go stand near a plant and it doesn't seem like there's anything there, but if you stop moving, pretty soon you'll be amazed what's around it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for being here today. And, you know, as I'm listening to this, all I'm thinking is that these two things are the best way to the most effective treatment, right? It's if you do these things, you're going to find that treatment that's right for your problem sooner too. So you don't have to go through 10 different things, trying and error, trial and error. You really get to some good options fast. So thank you for being here. And this is our last presentation. So this wraps up our webinar series for our Urban Ag Pest Management series. So thank you for being here. And I will send that email on Monday with all of our recording links and maybe some links from the presentation today.
I like the fact that Lois is actually standing behind you. If only we could see her.
Oh, she is. She's right there watering.
She's watering.
There she is. Yep. Keeping those spider mites away.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone, and have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend.
Thanks, Maggie.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Maggie.
Bye. Bye, everyone.